So I think that's enough housekeeping for now, and it's time to officially kick off the workshop. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce TAFISA Vice President for the Americas, Ms. Catherine Forde, who's joining us all the way from Trinidad and Tobago, and who will give a few words of welcome on behalf of the TAFISA Board of Directors. So Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Keri. And welcome and good morning to all the facilitators this morning, to the participants, wherever you are. It's morning, it's afternoon, it's evening. On behalf of TAFISA and the TAFISA Board of Directors, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all today to the Mission 2030 workshop on good governance, leadership and integrity, organized in partnership with Transparency International and Liverpool John Moores University. Good governance, I might remind you, is one of the key themes of our Mission 2030. Good governance is an important topic for TAFISA, and we are constantly working to implement its principles in our work. In 2017, at the TAFISA General Assembly held in Seoul, Korea, South Korea, TAFISA's statutes were revised and a set of bylaws was adopted in alignment with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. In 2018, at the EU Sports Forum on the initiative of the European Commission, TAFISA signed a pledge for the implementation of good governance principles. Such commitments are essential to us at TAFISA for two main reasons. Firstly, they ensure that our processes follow principles of good governance and preserve our integrity, which is vital, which is very vital to our sustainability as an organization, and ultimately our success in our mission to create a better world through sport for all. Secondly, we strongly believe in leading by example. As the leader of the global Sport for All movement, we have a duty and a responsibility to practice what we preach and show our members, our partners, and our stakeholders how this helps us to be an effective, reputable, and trustworthy organization. Good governance, I might remind you again, should matter to all of us, and its principles can be implemented at all levels of governance, regardless of the type of the organizational structure in which we are evolving. It is our belief, it is our expectations that today's workshop will help you have a better understanding of what good governance is and how we can implement it at any level within our organizations. We at TAFISA are very honored to have with us renowned speakers and panelists whose expertise will greatly benefit the discussion. Thank you for joining this workshop. Lastly, I would also like to thank our partners for this workshop, Transparency International and Liverpool John Moores University, for their invaluable support. We are currently working together on developing resources to assist organizations in implementing principles of good governance at their level. You will hear more about this during the workshop. I wish you all a very inspiring and thought-provoking workshop, and that we meet your expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Catherine. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to TAFISA Secretary General, Mr. Wolfgang Baumann, and Board Member Dr. Mitra Ruhi, who are both in attendance today also. So to introduce myself, my name is Keri McDonald, and I'm the Business Development and Fundraising Manager with TAFISA, and I'll be moderating the workshop today. So the general aims of today's workshop are to provide a space and a platform for you, the members of the Global Sport for All community, to discuss and exchange on issues which are pertinent to good governance, leadership, and integrity. Through the consortium of expert speakers, the attendees will also receive insight, experiences, tools, and ideas on how to succeed with your own good governance strategies. Finally, the workshop will today not only provide awareness and knowledge and know-how, but we also want to introduce a practical solution that will be launched in the coming months, which is a good governance package. And the aim of the package, which my colleague will go into later, is to support you as global members of the Sport for All movement with starting and succeeding within your own good governance framework. So it's now my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Miss Sylvia Schenk, who's representing Transparency International. Sylvia is the former city councillor for legal affairs in sport in Frankfurt, Germany. She's also a lawyer specialised in compliance and sports law and is an arbitrator at the Court of Arbitration on Sport in Lausanne. Sylvia has been president of the German Cycling Federation, senior advisor for sport for Transparency International, and has been actively involved with Transparency Germany's national chapter over the past 15 years. Today, Sylvia will be giving welcome words on behalf of Transparency International, followed by a lecture on good governance, why it matters in sport for all. So Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Keri, and a warm welcome to everybody. I'm really happy to welcome you on behalf of Transparency International, because this is the start of a partnership with Transparency International and TAFISA on good governance in sport. As you have already heard from Keri, I have been involved in sport for a long time as a former athlete at the Olympics in Munich in 1972, but then as an official, and have entered the transparency movement in 2006. Because I observed some very strange situations and incidents within international and national cycling. And that brought me to the conclusion that I have to work on transparency, on democracy in sport, and that means on good governance in sport. So that was when I started with Transparency International and the German chapter. And in the meantime, I have advised several German sport federations, sport clubs, so smaller entities, and some international entities too. TAFISA is one of them for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. And I want to say a big thank you to Catherine and the entire board of TAFISA, and of course as well to Wolfgang, the General Secretary, and his team for the partnership we already had. And this partnership we want to extend to Transparency International and work more on the global level and involve as well our international chapters, because we have chapters of Transparency International in around 100 countries. So that could be a possibility to have a partnership as well on national level between members of TAFISA and members of Transparency International. So that's a long time aim we are working on. And of course, the governance package Keri has just mentioned. But now I would like to start with my presentation. And now the most exciting moment of every online presentation, whether I manage to share it. Tong, you will help me, okay? It comes, just a minute. No, nothing is shown. Have you opened the share?
You should be able to share your screen normally. Let me double check, but I think.
Okay, maybe. Oh, yes, just a minute. I hope this will work now. Have to go to the beginning.
Yes.
So you see it now, and I will try to start with a whole. No.
Go to slideshow, Sylvia.
Yeah, sorry.
There we are.
Sorry.
Perfect.
There it is.
Perfect.
So now you see it?
And from beginning?
Yeah? Do you see the first slide? Because I only see the first slide and nothing else now.
I think it's showing the presentation side on our end, but we can see it at least, so this works.
Or say, but then I better go. No. But then I'm afraid it will not continue.
Try to move to the second slide just to see.
Yeah. Do you see anything?
No, still the first one.
Yeah. So that sometimes that happens. Then I go out again. Just a minute. Hope it works. No, nothing works. Do you see the second slide now?
No, I don't see it, but I can share it on my end if you prefer, and then you just give me a cue to move to the next slide. Does this work for you?
Okay, then try it, because I can only bring it like that. You see it now? But the whole presentation.
Right now, we don't see anything.
Gaetan, if you could share.
Yeah, let me try to do it now.
Okay, then it's fine. Sorry, that's always difficult. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
So is it working for everyone now?
Well,
yes,
I only
we have
of it. It's cut on both sides.
It's cut on both sides. Okay.
If you go to the next slide, Gaetan.
Yes. But
yes.
I can see that it's not showing the whole thing. Let me find the display slate settings. This is not better.
Okay, so that's fine, and we can go to the first slide. Sorry for the delay, but technical issues are always complicated. So I will start with 3 short slides, 3 pictures, referring to scandals in international sport. I think all of you will know it's on high performance sport, but I think we have issues like that on a lower level in sports for all over the world too. So the first slide, please, is on FIFA. Gertrud, do you?
Yes, I'm trying. I don't know why it's stuck now. Oh, there we go. I think. I apologize, everyone.
Okay.
I think my laptop actually is struggling now. Do you see anything?
Yeah, so the first slide is on FIFA, and I think you all remember when the big scandals arose in 2010, 2015, 2016. That was a really starting point of discussing corruption in international sport. Then the second slide is on Simon Biles. Why doesn't it work? So I think you have heard about that. It's about sexual abuse. We had a lot of cases in the last 1 or 2 years coming up. Old cases, but recent cases as well in every country, nearly all over the world. So I think no country is free of it. Not Germany, not the US, not African, not Asian, not other countries. And the third slide is on a specific issue coming up during or before the Olympics in Japan and Tokyo this year. A report by Human Rights Watch on taibatsu. That's a traditional situation in Japanese sport that children who are trained for high performance sport at a very young age already are not treated in a way one should usually expect it. So these are 3 examples from high performance sport from different continents, but we have issues like that in sports for all too. So for the next slides, I think you all know about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Can you go to the next slide, please? Just briefly, and then take already slide 6, please. So you know the Sustainable Development Goals, and there sport is mentioned in number 37 as an important enabler of sustainable development. I will not go through all the wording here, but just to say sport for all is a very good mean to really work on development and peace, tolerance and respect and empowerment of women and young people, individuals and communities, and on health, education, and social inclusion. So you all know about that. That's why you are engaged in Sport for All, why you are doing the work you are doing. But sometimes it doesn't happen by itself. Just by organizing sport, we will not avoid to have as well people harmed by sport or within the sport organization. So that's what we are talking about. And if we look onto the next slide, that's the Sustainable Development Goal number 16. It talks about, can you go to the next slide? About peace, justice, and strong institutions. And strong institutions we need as well in sport to ensure that the rights of people, the rights of individuals are preserved. And we can go to the next slide, please. So now I'm coming to the Kazan Action Plan. I think many of you have already heard about this plan. It is based on the Berlin Declaration of 2013, and it originates from MINEPS. That's the International Conference of Sport Ministers, happening around every 4 or 5 years. So it was in Berlin in 2013, saying we need good governance in sport for all and on all levels. And the Kazan Action Plan was approved in 2018 by the sport ministers from all over the world. And the Kazan Action Plan says it's that effective protection and promotion of the integrity of sport are important for all the good things what sport can do, for having sport as really a force for good within societies and all over the world. And therefore, sport value education and skills development in and through sport are very important as well to TAFISA and its members. And that's why we are now talking about good governance. And we can go to the next slide, please. This will more in detail tell you about what the Kazan Action Plan says in relation to good governance in sport. It's about prevention education, awareness raising, legislation. That means legislation by governments and states, but as well rules you need in sport to ensure that people behave in an ethical way, because just by asking for fair play, just by asking for integrity and talking about values, you will not reach the aim of people really behaving like that. So you need at least some rules. Then you need protection of whistleblowers to make sure that people who observe something, an incident, an abuse, whatever, can tell the organization or an independent ombudsperson or somebody else about what has been observed so that somebody can deal with the situation. We need media freedom and we need information exchange in investigation. And above all, and Catherine has already talked about the commitment of TAFISA in this aspect, we need to protect and respect human rights. So that's what is expected nowadays by governments, by the international community, from sport organizations all over the world, including Sport for All organizations. And that is why TAFISA and Transparency International hope to support you with the development and implementation of human rights concepts. You will learn more about that by what John is going to tell you later on the governance package. And we hope with the governance package to really help you with a step-by-step approach to improve the situation in your organizations, your organization, or within your membership organizations, depending on whether you are an umbrella organization or a Sport for All organization. So please to the next slide. So now what is it all about? What is new with good governance? Because I'm sure all of you up to now have already, and everybody in sport, tried to work in an integer way. That we don't have people coming from a very difficult background to sport, but usually we have people engaged in sport who are very idealistic, who want to do something for good, who want to do something for the youth, for their country. But what we have observed in sport, in quite many other organizations, just by working on a good content like sport, youth sport, will not mean that per se everything runs smooth and that per se the organization will only do good things. There are always risks that people will behave in a way we cannot tolerate, or that things can happen that the organization will need to deal with. So what we learned from the quote I had in the beginning from Simon Biles, who said the system of gymnastics in the US has enabled the abuse of power. Systems, whether in sport or in other areas, can enable empowerment, or they can enable abuse of power. And so that's why every system, including sport organizations and sport for all organizations, have to see which risks do we have, how can we present abuse of power, how can we prevent misbehavior, and how can we prevent the violation of basic rights of our members, of athletes, and so on. So that's what good governance is about, to work on a systemic approach to strengthen the system and the organization, and to have an overall approach on prevention, and to have transparency, accountability. And these two principles are very important. And it's not just about principles. I will come back to that later at the end of my presentation. It is always as well about culture. Just to establish principles will not suffice, but you need always to change the culture, to have an open culture, talk about mistakes, and try to discuss with people what could be better for in the future. So please, to the next slide. And if we talk about good governance, everybody has a role to play. The leadership in sport, Catherine already mentioned that TAFISA will lead by example. That's the most important principle for good governance, because if the top leadership doesn't behave in the right way, is not transparent, and so on, then you cannot expect your members, the athletes or whoever, to follow. So that's a very important issue. And this applies to the international sport federations, national Olympic committees as umbrella organizations, as well for sport for all organizations. They have to take the lead, and the International Olympic Committee, as well as the Association for Summer Olympic Federations and so on, are already working on their leadership role in good governance, with a lot of publications in the last 2 or 3 years, with benchmarks and so on. So there's already a lot of documents in the world of sport on good governance. But the main issue is that each of these organizations have to work on their own governance and then support their members to as well implement good governance. And that's what I think within the TAFISA membership is very interesting, because you have the umbrella organizations and you have single sport for all organizations who could profit from the support of the umbrella organization. So these are different roles within the implementation of good governance. And then, of course, the governments who have approved the Kazan Action Plan and who are asking on the international level for good governance in sport, they have a role to play to support the national sport organizations, to give them advice, to maybe link financial support to the fulfillment of a step-by-step approach to good governance, and thus ensure that the national federations really as well apply good governance. And for the universities, I will not go into details there, but I think there is a lot to do with advising sport, with establishing rankings for good governance in sport, and for looking into details on the implementation, but as well as developing the future of good governance in sport. So all kind of members of TAFISA, in my view, can and have an important role to play. And I think it will be TAFISA's task for the future to really shape specific support for the different kind of members within TAFISA, what they can do to support good governance in the future. So for the next slide, please. So I will start, you can then have a look. Yeah, there it is. Just to give a brief overview, what you need for a good governance concept, and to make it a little bit more practical, that you can have an idea in your head. I always compare it to a football match. You can as well compare it to handball and water polo, but I think a football match would be the easiest to do. For a football match, you need structure and rules defining the game. You need the pitch, how big it is, you need 12 meters to the goal and so on, and you need the rules in detail, how you have to play football. But of course, you always have, and you know it's the risk of foul play. Therefore, you need values, and based on these values, you need as well rules defining foul play. It doesn't suffice to say, well, football is played just with the foot, but you have to say, well, if you take the hands, then it will be foul play and there will be a sanction. So that's the same in daily life. You need the overall rules, but then you need rules on how to behave in detail based on the values you have on respect and fair play in the example of sport and football. And with the rules, of course, you need the information, because if the players don't know about the rules, about what is foul play, they will not adhere to the rules. So you need information and you need education. And education doesn't mean just to learn the rules itself, but to understand why the rules are important, why it is important to respect fair play and not to have foul play. And even then, if you have done all that, have the rules on fair play, have the information and education, you know, if it's about competition, if the teams are eager to win, then not everybody will always stick to the rules. There will be fouls all over the game. That can happen. That's normal. That's human to not always stick to the rules in such a competitive situation. And therefore, you need a referee and you need controls. And the referee has a yellow and a red card to make sure that if something goes wrong, he can show, please behave and look and stick to the rules. And I think you all know that if a referee in the beginning of a match doesn't very clearly show that he or she doesn't want the rules to be breached, then the referee will not be able to really lead the match in a smooth way. It means when you not from the very beginning make sure that every rule is obeyed to and that everybody sticks to the rule, then after 15 minutes, 20 minutes within a football match, the players will think, oh, the referee doesn't care, so we can do whatever we want. We have had even big international matches where things like that happen. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that what I just explained about the smooth running of a football match, trying to have a fair played football match, that this is transferred easily to what you need to have for a good governance concept. You need structure and statutes defining the sport organizations. But nevertheless, so you have always the risk of misuse of power, be it while people have too much work to do and just want to decide something and solve a problem in a quick way and doesn't care for the rules, or whether they just don't want to stick to the rules. There are always a lot of risk of misuse of power. Therefore, you need values, transparency and accountability within your organization. And you need rules defining integrity. That's a code of conduct. And of course, like with a football match, you need information and education. Why is the organization aiming for good governance? Why is it important to stick to the rules of the code of conduct? What is the overall approach of the organizations? And you need control and sanctions, because without that, you will see that things happen nevertheless. And just to have the rules, just to have a code of conduct will not really change the situation. So once again, it's very important to lead by example, to have zero tolerance to misbehavior. That doesn't mean zero tolerance. You have always to have a very strict sanction, a very serious sanction. Sometimes, at least at the beginning, if you are starting the process of good governance, it may be sufficient just to discuss what has been going wrong, to say, well, you haven't applied the rules, so we don't want that anymore. Please, for the future, stick to the rules. But nevertheless, you have to address every misbehavior, because again, remember the football referee, if he or she doesn't address foul play from the very beginning, it will not be possible to have a football match according to the rules. So it's very important to address every misbehavior, talk about it, because quite often, if you start to discuss it at an early stage, you can prevent bigger problems at a later stage. And that's very important. That will save resources for your organization. And what is most important, I already mentioned it beforehand, not just to have code of conduct, values, principles written, but to work on a transparent culture, because without changing the culture, you will in the end not be able to really change the situation in your organization and to really prevent misbehavior. So we can briefly go past the next slide, because that's just to remind you of the football match, that you see once again how it transfers from good governance concept to a football match and back again. And I will now end with talking about culture a little bit more in detail, but for that I will use a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale from the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen. I don't know whether it's known all over the world, but at least there is a Wikipedia report on this fairy tale, so you can read it afterwards. It's about the emperor's new clothes. It's in a former time. To an emperor, there came two tailors telling him, we have the best clothes ever been produced in the world. It's bright colors, very wonderful colors. It's a wonderful clothes, and you can't really feel it. It's a very light clothes, and we want to produce a uniform for you for the big parade. But they added, you can only see it if you have very good eyes. So some people will have difficulties to see the bright colors and so on. The emperor doesn't see anything, because in fact there is nothing. There is no such clothes as the tailors are telling him. They are just telling fake news, we would say nowadays. But the emperor doesn't want to admit that he doesn't see anything. And so he says, oh yes, wonderful clothes. I would like to have a uniform for the big parade. And then he asks to the people around him, his environment, do you see the nice clothes? Is it wonderful? It will be a wonderful uniform. And everybody says, oh yes, Mr. Emperor, oh yes, Your Majesty, it's wonderful clothes. No one sees anything, but they don't dare to say it, because they are afraid to utter their doubts. They think, well, I will not say that I don't see anything, because the emperor is seeing something and the others are seeing something too. So in the end, the tailors are doing like really making the uniform. And then there is a big parade, and the emperor with his new uniform, as he thinks, goes down the streets of the big city. And all the people watching, they say, oh, I don't see anything. Do you see anything? They have told there's a wonderful uniform. I don't see it. But no one really says it loudly. And then in the end, a small child is just shouting, He's in his underwear. Has nothing on him. And then everybody says, oh yes, I have seen it too. He's in his underwear. He has nothing on it. I think this fairy tale from 150 or how many years ago is a very good example for what culture we need if we really want to embrace good governance and a transparent culture in sport organizations or in any other institutional organization. Because if people don't say when they have doubts, if they don't dare to say if they have doubts, or if they observe something that's going wrong, then it can have a very bad impact on everybody. Here you have the situation, it's bad for the emperor, it's bad for his environment, for everybody of his staff who didn't dare to say anything because they have contributed to the final situation, and it's bad for the whole country because the emperor is going there in his underwear and everybody is at the end laughing about the country and the emperor. So this is, I think, a good picture to see what we need. We need leadership that empowers criticism, that asks them, for example, the members of a commission, the members of the executive committee, their members, the athletes and everybody to say when something goes wrong, to tell them if there are doubts. And we need, of course, everybody in his or her respective role to say, oh, I have a question. Oh, I have doubts. I don't see anything, or I have a different opinion. If we don't achieve to have such a culture where every doubt is dealt with, then in the end we have organizations who are not able to prevent even bigger and serious abuse, who will not be able to do the best out of their possibilities, because you need to integrate all opinions, you need to talk about doubts. This will make the organization and all people involved, the emperor as well as his staff and the whole people, stronger than before. So that's my small narrative at the end to remind you of, it's not just about what we are going to provide you with, a good governance package, principles, code of conduct, etc. But then still you have to work on the culture, and that's a good big challenge, but I think it's really worthwhile, and I hope we will together have the opportunity to work on this with TAFISA and with all the organizations presented here and more. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to you, Sylvia, for an excellent presentation. I know that I learned from your wealth of knowledge and expertise there, so I'm sure that the participants did also. I would really encourage all participants to write any questions or comments that you may have for Sylvia in the chat. While we're waiting for some questions to come through, I have a couple for you, Sylvia, so I can get the ball rolling. The first one is regarding the connotations and the way that a lot of organizations may feel when they hear the word governance. I think sometimes there's this air of uncertainty or apprehension, or maybe even a bit of nervousness when it comes to discussing governance within Sport for All organizations. Number one is, why do you think that we have this connotation? And number two, the second part of the question would be, how do you think we can challenge this and we can change the narrative so that actually governance is something that we look at more positively and something that we celebrate one another with?
Well, I think there are two main issues that make people reluctant of talking about good governance. First of all is that they are feeling like being attacked. But I'm not coming and saying, well, you in sport, you are all corrupt, you are all abusing your power. No, not at all. You are doing a very good work, and but you could do better, or you would be supported by a framework of good governance. It would make it easier for you in some aspects, and it would give you even a better reputation to the outside world. So first of all, don't feel attacked, don't feel like criticized, and have in mind that this is a development from the last about 20, 30 years, not just in sport. It came from governments, it came from politics, it came from business, where we have compliance started about 25, 30 years ago. And now it is applied as well in sports. So it's an overall development all over the world, and not just for sport. And it's not saying sport is corrupt or anything like that. But you have the same problems like other institutions, and you should deal with them. And the second point, and that's something I hope we can contribute to, is the fear of quite many people in sport. We have so much work to do, and we are working with volunteers, and they are already doing so much work. And now we have to do more work on governance. And so that's something, I think there are two arguments to help to overcome it. One is that quite many sport organizations already have at least part of good governance, and it's more talking about how to have a comprehensive approach to make it easier. So it's not everything new, you don't have to change everything, you just have to look which gaps do I have and what can I do to fill these gaps. And then the second point, if you have a functioning good governance concept, and if you have changed the culture accordingly, like I just said to my last slide, then you will have a stronger organization. And if something happens, and something can happen everywhere, every time, then you will be better prepared and save a lot of resources and time, because you know what to do, you have the processes prepared and so on. So in the end, it's not more work, but it will save work and resources. And I think that's important to look at.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I'm just having a look at some of the comments and the questions that have come through the chat. And I can see that Pat Daly has said, great presentation, Sylvia. How would you define the link between values, behaviours and culture? Oh, shall I start another presentation right now? I will try to answer briefly. Values is the overall concept. So to have respect, to have transparency, to be non-discriminatory and so on. So that's what you usually write down in a code of ethics, and that's one page, more or less. But that shouldn't be a long document. Then you need concrete rules for some parts. It depends on the situation in your organization. Usually you start with a risk assessment. Which specific risks do I have? And do I need specific rules for the risks I have? I always give a very simple example. If you are a swimming federation or club and you are providing swimming courses for small children, then you have a big risk of sexual abuse of children, because we had several cases in Germany, specifically in swimming, and I know about that in other countries as well. So then you need a very sophisticated prevention program and control program regarding misuse of kids. If you're an organization for the elderly people above 60 and with dancing or gymnastics or whatever, then of course there can be sexual harassment or something like that, but it's not a big risk, to be honest. And I can say it, I'm past 60 years, so I don't have a lot of fear of that in my age. And then you don't need a sophisticated program, but perhaps you need something on the health situation of elderly people. So look onto the risks and then work on the rules you need. What I always recommend is to have a code or regulation on conflict of interest. Because usually in sport organizations, you have a lot of conflict of interest with volunteers working in a job, working in a sport organization, and then so conflict of interests may arise. So you need a specific rule on that so that everybody knows what is expected. And then to have regulation on gifts and undue advantages, so corruption in a narrow sense. I think that would be helpful, but not every organization has to have a specific rule on everything. I always say as much as needed, but as little as possible, because that's the best. Don't have too many rules. Excellent. Thank you so much, Sylvia. There's other comments and questions that have come in, but I am conscious of the time, so we will move on. But if there's any time left over at the end, then maybe Sylvia can come back to a couple of the questions. So Sylvia—
Oh, I can answer in writing, Keri. If they are sent to me, I will answer you in writing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Much appreciated. Okay, so now we're moving on to the panel, and TAFISA is absolutely delighted that we're joined today by fantastic speakers from all over the world who all have insight, experience, and knowledge to share regarding governance, leadership, and integrity. So alongside Sylvia, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our other speakers. We have Lynsey Tweddle, Strategic Lead Governance at Sport England. And after joining Sport England 6 years ago, Lynsey was tasked with developing and implementing the Code for Sports Governance with governance colleagues at UK Sport. The code set world-leading standards for governance in sport and has effected significant change within the sport and physical activity sector and in England and the UK. Lynsey recently led the review of the code alongside UK Sport colleagues. She also works with Sport England's partners and the wider sector on other projects and initiatives promoting good governance, for example, with the Football Association on its governance code for county football associations. Lynsey is also a mental health first aider and passionate about incorporating well-being in the workplace. Our second panelist joining us is Dr. Darlene Kluka, Research Associate at the University of Pretoria. Darlene holds 2 doctoral degrees, motor learning from Texas Women's University and sport management from the University of Pretoria. As well as her position at the University of Pretoria, Darlene is a member of the Commission on Sport Management Accreditation Board of Directors and charter member of USA Volleyball Sports Medicine and Performance Commission. Darlene has served as Vice President of the International Council of Sport Science and Physical Education, Vice President of USA Volleyball, President of National Association for Girls and Women in Sport, President of the International Association of Physical Education and Sport for Girls and Women, as well as Deputy Delegate to the United States Olympic Committee. In addition, Darlene has published numerous journal articles on governance in sport and is the primary author of Governance of Sport, Aspects and Insights. Our third panelist today is Mr. Stanley Mutoya, the Chief Executive Officer from African Union Sports Council Region 5. Prior to his decade-long employment with the African Union Sports Council Region 5, Stanley served as Chief Executive Officer at the Zimbabwe Olympic Committee. Throughout his extensive career, Stanley has been heavily involved in governance and policy formulation and review, including change design and management. African Union Sports Council Region 5 has been a very close partner of TAFISA for several years, and we're very proud to work together on programs such as the TAFISA CLC, the Certified Leadership Course, the Female Leaders of Tomorrow project, and the Women Mentorship Leadership Program. Stanley also has a rich educational background with a plethora of education and training. And our last but certainly not least panelist today is Mr. Keith Joseph, Secretary General of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines National Olympic Committee. As well as his position within the National Olympic Committee, Keith is the Secretary General of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committee. He's an appointed Vice President of the Technical Commission of the Central American and Caribbean Sports Organization and the third Vice President of the Pan American Sports Organization. With an extensive background in sport spanning several decades, Keith has served across many organizations, and among his many engagements and commitments to promoting sport and education, Keith established the CANOC Olympic Committee, is a member of the International Olympic Committee's Education Commission, and is co-opted onto the Sport Committee of the Commonwealth Games Federation. Keith is also an active sport journalist with several publications. So that's the 4 panelists that will be joining us today, and they'll be intervening now. Each panelist will be giving 10 minutes to present, and then following all 4 interventions, we'll open the floor for 20 minutes for questions and answers coming from participants. Again, please do not hesitate to use the chat function, and we strongly recommend that you write your comments and you write your questions in the chat function. Okay, Lynsey, I will now open the floor for you. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Keri, and thank you to TAFISA, Transparency International and Liverpool John Moores University for inviting me along today. I'm delighted to be here, and especially delighted to be in a, well, even if it's a virtual room of people that are interested in good governance. So good to see you all, and thanks for having me here. I think, Gaetana, you're able to share the slides for me. That would be great. Thanks so much. So I've just put together a few slides to talk to you hopefully about you know, an area that's particularly important for us and that we've been working on for sort of 4 or 5 years now, which is a code for sports governance. And as Keri said, my name's Lynsey Tweddle, and I'm strategic lead and responsible for the code for sports governance and implementing that in England and working with colleagues across the UK. So next slide, please, Gaetan. So just to give you a bit of brief information about Sport England and who we are. We're an arm's length body of government, so we're not a government department, but we sit under the Department for Culture, Media and Sport of the UK government, but we are sort of separate from them. We're responsible for growing and developing grassroots sport in the UK, and we invest annually about £300 million of public money. And probably around about 30% of that comes directly from government, but the majority, 70%, or more, is from national lottery, so through the national lottery that's operated in the country, and that various monies are distributed to good causes in the UK. So the partners we work with include national governing bodies of sport, sport organisations that work locally with local authorities, local government organisations, charities, small community groups, sports clubs, many different types of organisations that we invest in and work with. And we recently launched about just nearly at the start of this year, a 10-year vision called Uniting the Movement, which is a vision to transform lives and communities throughout England through sport and physical activity. And Uniting the Movement is really about bringing everyone together that works in sport and physical activity in the country to do those things. And good governance features highly in that strategy. It's one of what we're calling a strategic catalyst. So it's one of 5 strategic catalysts, which is essentially where we're talking about catalysts for change. What are those things that we need to do to enable the right conditions for us to be able to transform lives and communities? So the other catalysts are things like the investment. How do we invest? What insight and information do we need? But good governance is a key one of those. So next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of context and timeline about the Code for Sports Governance, it emanated from the UK government sports strategy in December 2015 called Sporting Future, where they set a requirement for us and UK sport to develop the code. And in May 2016, the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, was hosting an anti-corruption summit in London, an international anti-corruption summit. And we produced then a charter for sports governance in the UK, which was an early document, a precursor to the code, which then came later in the year. So in October of that year, we then launched this new code. And that followed sort of a period of consultation with the bodies that we work with. And then the April of the following year, that basically became live. It came into force, and I'll talk a bit on the next slide about what the code actually is. And then sort of three, nearly 4 years on, we decided last year that it was time to review the code. It had had a good period of operation, and we should look at whether we needed to change that and what updates or amendments we needed to make. And we announced the key changes for those just a couple of months ago, a few months ago now. And I'll touch on some of those as I go through the presentation. So next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of information about what the code is. And I should say, I found myself nodding a lot when Sylvia was speaking. So there are lots of things that I'll hopefully touch on and that correspond with the principles and the sorts of things that Sylvia outlined as well, and I'm sure we'll get into in terms of discussions. But it's a clear set of governance requirements. It draws on accepted UK good practice in governance. So I think Sylvia mentioned about sort of the corporate and business world and where they have been with governance. So we drew heavily on the UK Corporate Governance Code, which applies to businesses, but it has some sport specific elements. It needed to be relevant for the sports sector. And again, like I said, we developed it in consultation with the sector. So that joint project, it is mandatory. So it's mandatory for organisations that seek our investment. So I think, Sylvia, you also touched on sort of conditions and how you can sort of make these things happen, or what levers you can use. And actually our investment in organisations, us and UK Sport, if they want to seek money from us and it's public money, then they have to comply with the code or have an action plan in place to comply with it. So it's managed to affect some quite significant change as a result of that. It also, given the fact it's mandatory, it needs to be proportionate. We work with such a range of thousands of different bodies. So it has a tiered approach. It has 3 tiers. The bottom one has 8 minimum governance requirements and the top one has about 47 requirements in it, which sounds a lot, but a lot of that is codifying existing good governance practice. And then it aims to be progressive. So it has best practice elements in it, but it also tries to drive that continuous improvements in governance. So set some sort of standards for ambitious standards for what we want to achieve and where we want to go. So next slide, please. So just this, I'm not going to read through all of these, but this just gives you a sense of the principles. All of the requirements in the code at any level, at any tier, sit under these 5 code principles. And you can see they include some of the topics and themes that Sylvia was talking about. So communication, in that one we talk about transparency and accountability. And under standards and conduct, we talk about integrity. And continuous improvement. So I don't want to sort of talk through those, but that just gives you a sense. The people one also talks about diversity of background, thought, independence in decision making, and the importance of serving your community and your stakeholders. So everything within the code sits under those 5 principles. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the impacts and what's happened in terms of implementing that and the impact that it's had over the last sort of 4 years or so. Over 4,000 organisations have sort of effectively been assessed against the code and have met it. The vast majority of those are at that lower level, meeting that tier 1. So that's small community groups, charities, local groups. That are meeting minimum good governance standards, but the sort of things that would be relevant in their context and their environment. But 300 partners, around 300, more than 300 partners at the top levels of the code have also been assessed as compliant. And that's affected, as I said, some significant change within organisations, many national governing bodies of sport and big local sports organisations. So that's things like reforms to board membership. So we've introduced, for example, a requirement to have at least 25% independent members at the board table. And also things like maximum term limits around the board table, so that there's a refresh of ideas and you have different people coming in. You're not generating the same people talking all the time. And also improved diversity around the board table. So the real importance of bringing different diverse viewpoints to improve decision making. And there's a wealth, particularly in the corporate world, of evidence and research around the benefits that brings and the success it brings to organisations and companies when you've got different people scrutinising decisions. And then, just as Sylvia spoke so well about that improved transparency, making sure that organisations are publishing information, making that information available to their stakeholders about a variety of different things, about their governance, about their strategies, about their finances, the sorts of things that you you know, that doesn't mean you have to publish everything. You know, of course, there are confidential things that you need to operate as a business, but there are many things that stakeholders, members of organizations should be seeing, should be able to see, to enable them to ask the right questions of organizations and to challenge and question where that's important. And then Sylvia spoke about this too. We didn't speak beforehand, I should say. We obviously, it just shows there are these common themes of good governance and of course a code of conduct, which very much talks about the areas of integrity, values, behaviours. I think one of the somebody asked about, you know, that you would expect of board members, leaders, making decisions within organisations. So there's many other things in there, but I just picked out a few, and this is where there have been changes within organisations who have had to have, you know, it did cause some challenge, and I'll mention that a little bit, but it has affected change in these areas, and I've put a little bit there around various different bits of support that we've provided. So it isn't compliance really. Our approach, our take to it is very much about helping organisations to meet this, to get to that place. They're willing to do it. We want to help them to do it. So we've put in a variety of different resources, developed things like the Sports Governance Academy, which offers networking resources, projects related to diversity and inclusion and more diverse appointments and recruitments on boards, and COVID related support as well. So lots there, but I'll maybe move on to the next slide. I'm conscious of time. So I mentioned at the start that we'd recently, just last year, kicked off a review of the code, and I've just included some of the feedback we got from the consultation, the independent consultation, just to give you a sense, a bit more of the impact of the code since it's been in place and what partners, people that have to implement it and use it, have said. So the vast majority of people said the code had been effective and helpful. It did in many cases cause them, you know, challenges. There's long-standing governance practices that they had to change as a result of this, and some of them had wanted to do that for a long time, but the code helped provide a bit of a lever, particularly the link to funding and investment. So it wasn't that it was easy to do it for everybody, but it's enabled them to get over some hurdles into a better place. And the two main areas of impact they sort of cited as part of the feedback was just a general overall tightening of governance. You'd hope that would be the case, right? But also some improvement in equality and diversity on the board. So the initial code in 2016 had a sort of target around female representation on boards of 30%. So asking organisations to adopt a target of 30%, not a quota, but a target. And actually, when we did the survey as part of this review, the average was now 44% of women on board. So you can see that had an impact and a change in terms of equality and diversity. And a number of them talked about some of these good governance changes starting to filter into organisational culture. And, you know, Sylvia spoke a lot about culture, and I would, you know, this is a code, but talks about lots of different requirements, but at the heart of it, what we're trying to do is talk about culture among boards, culture about good governance. So absolutely, that's the key thing. Having these structures and frameworks in place helps, but how people use them and how people operate them and the people that do that is the most important thing. And so the areas identified for improvement as part of the review were accessibility, making some of these things easier to understand and grasp, particularly at that lower tier 1 level, making it interactive, so easy to sort of, again, access the tools, and maintaining that proportionality of applications. So given the vast different number of type of organisations that we work with. So I think I'm on to my last slide now. I think the last slide actually says thank you, but this is my last sort of slide of substance. So just to give you a flavour of some of the changes that we've put in place as part of the review. So at the top 2 tiers of the code, we will be, diversity and inclusion was the main sort of substance of the review and the main lens through which we looked at the review and improving that within the UK and England sport and physical activity space. So we will now be asking all partners at that level to create and implement a diversity and inclusion action plan. So this is amongst their board, setting real ambitions for improving diversity and inclusion at their board, within their leadership team and beyond. And we will be putting some substantive support alongside that to help that happen. This is not just about having a plan, a document that's written down. It's about meaningful, tangible impact in this space. So that's a key focus area for us. We've also implemented a new requirement around cascading good governance. So the code has predominantly focused at the board level, but we're now sort of saying you need, a number of organisations have done this already. Keri mentioned the Football Association project I worked on, but trying to make sure that good governance, good decision making, and all the things that Sylvia and I've been speaking about cascade throughout organisations as well. Welfare and safety, duty of care is really important. So we've said we want a lead director on the board. That's not an operational executive director. That's somebody around the board table that can nudge, ask the right questions in this space and have that front of mind when boards are discussing different matters. There's a new requirement around environmental social governance. So asking boards to think about that, factor that into their decisions when they're talking about whatever it is they're talking about, whether that be in how they procure things, events they're running, or whatever it is, that they think about those matters when they're talking about decisions. And also that the organisations have in place a people plan that thinks about all of the people that they're responsible for, employees, volunteers, participants, whoever it is. And then at that tier 1 local level, there are various changes. There's 8 requirements at that level, but they focus around, diversity, inclusion, transparency, making things available like we were just speaking about, good financial practices, so sound, good financial practices, and also thinking about managing risks and liabilities. Often if you're a small group, you don't have like a big, your volunteers, you don't have lots of people employed or experts in this area, but just making sure that that's thought about, particularly I think in light of the pandemic and some of the challenges that have arisen for much smaller groups. And to that point about accessibility, we're producing a new separate booklet with much more accessible language for the tier 1 audience, who are those small local charities or community groups. So I'm conscious I haven't been looking at the time, but I think I'm probably right up on my time or a bit over. So thank you so much for giving me the chance to sort of come and speak and share that with you. And hopefully you will see in there a lot of themes alongside some of the things that Sylvia spoke about, and hopefully my other colleagues here today. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Lynsey. That was absolutely fantastic. I would now like to introduce Darlene as our second panelist today. So Darlene, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you. I want to thank so much TAFISA and Transparency International and Liverpool John Moores University for providing me with this marvelous opportunity. You will probably hear a few things that are going to happen through my little presentation that Sylvia and Lynsey have talked about. The exciting part about all of this is that you will see there will be some commonalities, and that is quite exciting. So I'm just waiting for Keri to load up the PowerPoint. Hopefully it will work. I apologize that my video is not working. I'm really in a very nice blouse that has a world map on it, but unfortunately only I get to see that. That's a nice joke. Thank you, John, for smiling, and Keri for smiling. Sylvia and Mr. Garcia, I'm not quite sure yet, but
your presentation's just coming, Darlene. We're just loading from this side.
Fantastic. Well, I'll kind of start, and then we'll catch up a little bit. So what I have found is that in the 21st century, corruption, doping, and match fixing, in addition to a lack of efficiency and mismanagement with governing bodies of sport, seem to be on the rise. Increased commercialization and globalization continue to generate tension between the perceived moral, social, and economic values of sport. Scandals in sport are not new and not limited to one geographic area or to a single sport. This is the second slide, Keri, so if you hold it right there, that would be great. There's considerable agreement, there we go, that's the first slide, that good governance practices are essential in eradicating and preventing corruption in sport, protecting its integrity, and maintaining public trust. So what I will share with you this morning is going to be a bit about these three areas: good governance, leadership, and integrity, and how we might look at them from probably about 20,000 meters as opposed to right on the ground. And if you go to the next slide, please. Thanks. The term governance comes from the Greek kubernon, which is to steer a ship. So essentially, governance deals with an optimal functioning of any organization. But as you can see from this chart, governance clearly is multidimensional. Definitions commonly describe dimensions of governance in terms of values, some functions, and outcomes. Governance typically involves cooperation and relationships between and among role players and stakeholders. And you've heard Sylvia talk briefly, and Lynsey with a little bit more detail on the notion of role players and stakeholders. So they exercise power along agreed mechanisms, rules, and regulations, and accountable decision-making. In addition, competent and ethical leadership enables and supports the process of good governance. It's supplemented by governance tools that are used to assess performance and steer an organization toward its goals. Next one, please. Okay, so as we see here, we have some commonalities, and my colleagues and I looked quite a distance and quite in depth with the kinds of things that are going to be included in definitions of these things. And so you'll see that many of these Sylvia spoke of. You also see that Keri, not Keri, sorry, so Lynsey also mentioned some of these. And so these are the things that are quite varying in their focus, as well as how in the world can you get these to be in working form with your organization or with the group that you're working. Next one, please. So here are some of the things that are included in good governance. All right, and so you obviously, with an organization called Transparency International, you will see that clearly this reflects transparency. It needs to be run effectively and efficiently. It also has to include stakeholders in decision-making, and also might have some unbiased and equitable decision-making along with it. Next slide, please. There are also some things that through the literature they've looked at in a variety of ways, looking at bad governance. So many times you've seen, or sometimes I hope less and less, you've seen absolutely people who are not competent, or they're disengaged from a board. In other words, people may want to be on a board or be in leadership of some capacity, but really not want the responsibility and the accountability that go with those things. It might be also a poor oversight of a president, a CEO, or the board members. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have recently experienced poor oversight by people who were members of a board. It really, really is painful, very, very painful. Also, the size of the board. Obviously, when people get on boards that have 100 members or 99 members, this really gets to be stifling. But the size of the board is probably in the low single digits, or perhaps maybe 10, 11, 12 at the most, in order to be able to get it to function effectively and have more good governance. And then risk for the organization or for of the larger entity might have risks ignored or not managed. Go to the next one, please. I know that there's been a couple of statements made this morning, for me, this afternoon for you, on governance in different cultural contexts. And obviously this means different things in different countries. So primarily in what we've had to look at, in general, we can say that in the Western world, for the most part, democracy, transparency, and accountability are generally accepted as fundamental. So governance really decides who has the power, who makes decisions, how are stakeholders making those decisions, how voices are made heard, and how account is rendered. And so with those kinds of building blocks, you'll see that these can change as we go around the world and look at cultural contexts. So governance in general can reflect the culture in which sport bodies set rules, underlying values and norms that guide processes and procedures. Next one, please. So I wanted to share with you a little bit now about what is included in leadership. And we've had these, and we'll talk just a moment from now about protecting integrity. Integrity can be part of leadership, or there are some people who believe that integrity is the essence of everything that involves governance. So the number one thing is, in my opinion, in order to protect that integrity, those who lead have to act in the best interests of the organization or with the group that they're working. This particular one is extremely important when we talk about the sensitive issues that go on as we discuss and we see what comes before us in order to make some leading decisions. We might also want to make sure that we have a number of policies or a number of documents that provide written decisions on things like conflict of interest, individual or board insurance, and open and honest, respectful communication. I want to say just a brief bit about board and individual insurance. Some of you who are volunteers, this is not a concern at all. But because my homeland is the United States, we have a tremendous amount of things that go on with litigation. So you always want to make sure that whatever is happening, the board and or you as an individual can be covered so that just in case something terrible happens, you have something to back up. And without that integrity to say, well, here are some situations, here's the way we can do this, then we leave ourselves open to things that are really could be avoidable. Another one, leadership, it also includes encouraging understanding, particularly about understanding how the organization works, its shared vision and its values. Creating an effective environment has to do with many things that Sylvia mentioned, as well as Lynsey, but also to be able to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable contributing. This is a real challenge at times, particularly if you're someone has a leadership style that is more autocratic than democratic. And respecting the process. This is what people really need to do, all of us. Read the documents that you get in advance of whenever you're having meetings. Follow the agenda, finish one topic and go on to the next topic. Respect board decisions. If a group of people has decided this is the way it's going to be, then your job as a person that's in leadership is to support that, rather than to go around and say, you know, I did not vote for that, I did not agree with that, I'm not going to be concerned with that, and then speak, as we might say, evilly about whatever the decision was made. Next one, please. And this last portion has to do with integrity. And it's multifaceted, and it's really related to ethics. So the first piece is this respects moral values and personal qualities. And this does not mean moral values in terms of a religious doctrine. It means about what it is that you deal in terms of your honesty and your consistency of character. Without integrity, sport really is unsustainable. And what's the price that we pay for that? It could be self-fulfillment and social cohesion. And those are the two pieces, particularly where it comes for sport for all, that we see that those two things are necessary components of sport as we present it. The integrity of people, safeguards from violence and abuse. Also the safety and security of people, and that means those who participate and those who support those who participate, and that includes leadership as well as officials. Integrity of the competitions. Also, you've got to take care of the integrity of what happens when we compete. And then the integrity of organizations, and that has to do with good governance. I wanted to share with you quickly just a few things about the Kazan Action Plan. This was devised in 2018 in Kazan in Russia by UNESCO and various other stakeholders in the initiative. They believe, as many of us do, that integrity relies on ethical conduct of everybody who's involved. And that ethical conduct relies on transparent, protective, and accountable governing bodies and administrators. All right, and integrity, this plan believes that it is used as a driver. So with this plan, and you want to, all of you want to take a look at this just in case something was not mentioned before, and I apologize to Sylvia, I missed part of hers because I was having great difficulty getting on. That you reject the manipulation, you reject the discrimination, you reject cheating, you reject violence, abuse, and corruption, and you commit to internationally recognized human rights. And I think we can all agree to that. And by us also linking in with the Kazan Action Plan, I think that this will help all of us bring the world a little bit closer together in order to be able to continue to reach the goal of having good governance, good leadership, and based on solid integrity. If you would go to the next one, please. Please read this to yourself out loud. Did you say the future is nowhere? Or did you say the future is now here? Think about that. And if you did not say the future is now here, rethink and refocus on what it is that we're providing this little workshop for, to get us to think a little bit differently and a little bit out of the box for the future. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Darlene, for that really insightful overview that you provided us with. And although I'm sure I can speak on behalf of us all when I say we're disappointed we didn't get to see you, it was still an absolute pleasure to have your intervention today. So thank you, Darlene. Without further,
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Without further ado, I'd like to pass over to TAFISA's good friend and colleague, Mr. Stanley Mutoya.
Thank you, Keri, and a very good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you, wherever you are. It's an absolute pleasure, Keri, to be here once again with you and all the colleagues that are here. I do recognize all the 107 people that are joining us today. And I also want to thank TAFISA. I want to thank Transparency International, as well as recognize the Liverpool John Moores University. Thank you for organizing this session. I also want to appreciate, Keri, presenters that have come before me and with very insightful presentations that speak so passionately about issues of governance. I am not going to share any slides. I'll speak from the heart on a topic that is so passionate to me. I'm going to share just a few principles. If you hear some sound in the background, I've put my stopwatch at 10 minutes. So whenever my stopwatch goes, I'm going to stop at that time because I only have got 10 minutes to share. And I'm sorry if I'm going to speak too fast. My apologies around that. I just want to start by saying what the predecessors that have spoken before me have, in my view, addressed what I would call 12 principles of governance. It's participation, representation, fair conduct and elections, which is key. Number 2 is responsiveness that they've raised in governance. Number 3 is efficiency. And for me, efficiency is doing things right. And effectiveness is doing the right things, which is what they've mentioned as well. And we've had these terms coming up quite collectively. There's also the issue of openness and transparency, which is why we're all here. Number 4 is the rule of law in governance. Number 5 is a principle is ethical conduct, which we just had even now. Number 7 is competence and capacity. We must ensure that there are competencies and we develop them and there's capacity for people to deliver. Number 8 is innovation and openness to change, which is where I'm going to focus on. I'm going to share with you more on change management as an element of governance. Number 9 is sustainability and long-term orientation. Number 10 is sound financial management. And I know you and I would know that that is one of the most outstanding issues whenever people talk about bad governance, if I may. Most of the issues that are quite projected are those around financial management. But there is also issues of human rights, cultural diversity, and social cohesion as an element of governance. And lastly, accountability. So I'm going to share more on my practical experience from the introduction that Keri gave you. I do work in the African Union Sports Council Region 5. I work with 10 governments of member states to coordinate sport and sport for all and all other sport-related development issues. And one of the things that has been key in my experience has been the issue of change management. There came a time where in 2019, we met as an executive committee and realized that our organization needed to re-engineer. It needed more energy and impetus. It needed to be more relevant. It needed to be abreast with the key trends that are now existing. And incidentally, at that time, we had not known that we were going to be in such environment like this, which has shown that exposure because of COVID-19. So in May, our executive committee made a decision that we must embark on an organizational re-engineering process. And I became the change manager or change champion as a CEO of this organization. So we did embark on a process, which I must say I borrowed quite a lot from, there are quite a number of models, but the one I loved most was the model by Kurt Lewin, which he says, he calls it the unfreeze, change, refreeze model. And some people call it a Kurt Lewin 3-step model. I loved that because when he talks about unfreezing as a first stage of change management, he's saying, let people know what the change is about. Let people understand unfreeze them, make them comfortable to talk about the change that you want to introduce. Let them understand the fundamentals. Let them understand how it's going to impact them. What does it mean for them? Because there are some people that are also quite scared of the unknown. There's that fear of unknown that people might have. So you have to unfreeze people when you make change. And the second step is once we've unfrozen people, then you change. In other words, you transition, you then introduce the change. And after introducing the change, Keri then says you refreeze. In other words, you consolidate, you reinforce, you ensure that there's stabilization of the change. And people accept that there is change. And I found that very, very important. When I then led this process, it meant that I had to come up with an organization, with a theoretical framework. And we called the model the 3S+P, because we needed organizational reengineering and we needed to address 3 S's. And this was the strategy of the region, which is the first S. There's skills, rather the structure of the region, and then the skills of the region, which are the 3 S's, plus the P, which is the programming. And that's why TAFISA comes in, because after that organizational change design, which was part of our unfreezing process, we had to engage with people. We had to make one-on-ones. We had to make focus group sessions. We had to have personal interviews. We had to have workshops. It was a lot. From 2019 throughout the whole year up to the first part of 2020, making all these consultative processes and redesigning and reshaping the process. It's very frustrating, colleagues. It can also be quite frustrating when people are criticizing, when people are punching holes, but change by itself, there's a philosopher that says to change is risky, but not to change is riskier. And therefore, you need a champion that has got resolute tenacity, a champion with shock absorbers, who is able to stand for what they believe. So you have to have it in your heart and transform and transfer that heart into the others. The passion is going to be transferable, because the best way to change is to ensure that you win people's hearts and then their minds will follow. You don't start by trying to win people's minds. Let them have the passion, let them understand what this is about. Then you are able to implement. I'm glad to say that after that exercise, we went back to the executive committee, they approved the model. That was first step number 1. But of course, we had to ensure that our legal framework, our constitution, our policies, our regulations, codes, they had to then to align to the model, which is a process then that brought in another spectrum of other experts that brought in now the legal side of things to then say, how does this change impact the form of this organization and its future? So the legal instruments had to be adjusted so that they then go to the principals. And for us, these are the ministers of sport. And I'm glad to say on the 2nd of December this year, we will be tabling our revised constitution, which is our last stage in terms of the change process, stage number 2. Once the constitution is adopted by ministers, then we are going to stage number 3, refreezing. Next year now we start training the new organs, training the new structures, bringing in the new systems. And I'm glad to say it has had an impact even on our Sport for All, because our approach to COC, to the Walk for Life, to the Women Leadership Program, to the Float, to the e-fitness programs, to the Morning Doctor program, all the programs we run around the Sport for All, they have had to be aligned to the new way of doing things. Along the way, there have been issues. I have 2 minutes that I just want to share with you on my time frame. A couple of things that I've observed from experience as I was driving the change. Number 1 is dream the change. You need a dreamer. You need somebody who has a vision that says, where do I see this organization from 10 years from now, 20 years from now, even when you are no longer there? You need to dream the change. Number 2, you need to design the change. What change do you want to see? Change can only be seen in other people's eyes when you see it yourself. You can't change things that you don't see. And so you have then to design the change. Number 3, you have to change the change. And that is important. Now you have to ensure you've got a way of implementing it. And number 4, then you assess the change. And those become key issues. So as I conclude, dear colleagues, in governance, when you want to manage change, you have to build change champions. You have to have effective communication. You need to have engagement with institutions and other stakeholders. You need to win the hearts and minds of the people. You need to have shock absorbers, like I said, because you are going to be shaken, you are going to be ridiculed, you are going to be brought to, question, you are going to be exposed, you are going to be challenged, and you must be ready to stand with what you believe. You have to celebrate small successes. Don't wait for big successes, small steps. When people accept your call, when people come to your meeting, when you have to celebrate these and celebrate with everyone else so that they feel they are part of the process. And don't take it personal. Don't take it personal. When people say, no, this does not work, don't take it personal. I know that's a very thin line between the heart and you separating from personalities. And lastly, delay is not denial. People may say not now. They are not saying no. So don't get frustrated, because that can happen when you are talking about change. So dear colleagues, I hope that in these 10 minutes that I've tried to share my experience, maybe there's one or two things that have made an impact to you. Maybe you also identify with what I've gone through. And I'm sure you would know that change itself is not an easy game to play. It is challenging, but it needs nerves of steel. May you aspire to inspire before you expire. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Stanley. Absolutely wonderful, as always, to listen to you and learn from you, and some really strong, excellent pieces of advice and some really strong finishing, concluding words there. So thank you so much. Always a pleasure. I would now like to to pass the floor over to Mr. Keith Joseph. So Keith, the floor is yours.
You put up the slides, please. Yeah.
We're just loading them now, Keith.
Okay, while we wait on that, let me just say thank you to all those who have attended, all those who have participated so far, and I hope that the momentum that we've had will continue through these last slides. You know that my session is called Reality Check. And that is because I was asked to look at the Olympic movement, the institutions within the Olympic movement, and in respect of good governance. And I thought it important to consider it a reality check. You know, of the presentation that we've had so far, one of the issues that I think was raised by the very first presenter had to do with, you know, defining governance and so on, and why governance is important. I believe that we need to, when we talk of governance, I think part of the culture that we have developed over time has to do with the lack of a distinction between governance, government, influence, and power. And I think that that is a critical component that is missing in terms of the way in which we approach the issues of good governance. So what is the reality check? Let's go. The next slide, the fundamental principles of the Olympic movement. I think you're all aware of them. The next slide. Yeah. And it speaks to all of the positives that we attach to the Olympic movement that we've come to know it, all that we want to do. And in a sense, it gives the impression of a do-good movement. As you know, the founding fathers were concerned about the state of society at the time and the reason for wanting to create the Olympic movement. But it is interesting that that last sentence, it is carried out under the supreme authority of the IOC, the supreme authority of the IOC. So when you see that kind of concept, you get a little bit bothered, because you're talking at the same time about consultation, you're talking about dialogue, you're talking about fostering peace, you're talking about combating injustice. We can go on to the next slide. And so we have a structure of the Olympic movement that speaks to a number of institutions and how do they work, you know, because essentially they tell you that the top three are the pillars of the Olympic movement, the top three. The others may or may not happen, but the top three are the pillars. The IOC itself, which is, as you know, is a self-propagating institution. The members elect themselves, right? The members nominate themselves. And were it not for the incidents that took place with the Salt Lake City scandal, we'd never have had the introduction of athletes commissions and some of these other things that followed from that. Next slide. The major activities that are undertaken, again, they do good movement. Getting a number of these things organized and saying that we're looking after gender equality, we're looking after legacies, we're fighting dope in sports, we're looking after refugees and sustainability, etc. Next slide. But the critical thing for us is that decision-making really is IOC, 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 IOC. To what extent are the institutions really involved in the decision-making process? And who determines the level of involvement? Who articulates really how these decisions are ultimately made? And we will deal with that. The next slide. You would have recognized this because while they were investigating the Salt Lake City scandal, they discovered that there's been almost a culture of corruption within the organization in terms of the bidding process, right? We wondered how did some countries get, I mean, some people didn't even know where Nagano was. And so far less to say that it was awarded to Nagano, et cetera, et cetera. And that continues to some extent, because when you look at the decision-making with regard to 2024 and 2028, and suddenly a decision that will combine the two, what were the motivating factors? And why did we lose the right for a second round of bidding to countries that may have been interested in hosting the games? Was it that we were looking solely at the economic power of the US and we didn't really want to lose the US as a venue, right? But at the same time, you know that they were bidding, the USOC and now USOPC had awarded the games of the bidding rights to Boston. And you know what happened there? The people of Boston says, hey, you didn't consult us. Are we not prepared to engage in that kind of expenditure? So while you as an institution, the Olympic Committee of the United States, thinks that is a good idea and you've gotten some people in Boston to make a bid, the people of Boston says we needed to be involved. We ought to be stakeholders because it's coming in our city. What's the cost for us? And if it's going to cost us, why aren't we involved in the decision-making process? Yeah, next slide. Here we go. Bribery exposed, not just for the Salt Lake City scandal, but even before that, the Australia bid versus Beijing in 2000, we discovered that there was some serious bribery going on, even in the middle of the night. Yeah. Why was this allowed? Oh, because the rules at the time did not say that you couldn't do this. Yeah. And therefore it is all right. Okay. And you note in the next slide, a comment from somebody who is now the vice president of the IOC. I thought it was necessary for us to show a commitment. So we justify the action that clearly in today's discourse is an act of defiance of good governance regulations and leadership and integrity, but it was all right. And today, the vice president of the IOC and head of the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Interesting, yeah? And of course, the next slide shows you your awareness of the Salt Lake City scandal and all that took place at that time, just how the bribery system worked and so on. But this is coming from an international organization that boasts of good governance, of leadership, and of integrity, and of all of the values that we've been talking about. And then the next slide tells you what happened in the IWF, which you're aware of, the 80-plus-year-old former president, having been first under house arrest for several years, and then losing his case at the end of the situation. The next slide shows you the FIFA debacle. And we know that even long after retirement, João Havelange of Brazil was still implicated, and the IOC took away his honorary membership of the IOC because of their understanding of him having been embroiled in the scandals. But there is a history, there is almost a culture within the organization. And you wonder to what extent the play of money, power, and influence dictate the style of leadership and the definition of integrity within our sporting organizations. The next slide speaks to a little bit more on TIFA, so we could go on to the next slide where we look at boxing. So the next slide, please. So that the International Olympic Committee has declared itself virtually an international sport police officer, because it then tells AIBA, forget about what happened in our own history and our own culture. We don't like what you're doing, and therefore we are taking control of your sport for the Olympics. You meet our requirements, and then we will deal with it. Then AIBA could very well say, well, let's look at your requirements and your adherence to your own requirements. You know, in truth and in fact, will you ever democratize, or will you continue ad infinitum with hand selection of individuals? There's also an attack on the International Weightlifting Federation. We are aware of, Sylvia mentioned also the issue in UCI, with which she was very familiar, right? So we ask the question that becomes necessary in the next slide. Has good ever been in governance? At any level? You know, just how much integrity do we find in international sports organizations? Or is it that we are having redefinitions, that we define the concepts to suit our particular needs at any point in time and our international stance? Yeah, so we want to impress and we say we are doing A, B, and C, and then you find that there's a dark underside afterwards. But that is very much, as the next slide suggests. Next slide. What is sport? It is a reflection of our societies. Governments do this all the time. And they get away with impunity in many countries. Happily, some countries are now making sure that some of those who were involved in corruption find their way to jail, etc., and serve time and what have you. But in truth and in fact, this is what has been happening all along in society. Sport cannot pull itself away from the societies in which they operate. Because the individuals who climb to leadership within our organizations emerge from those societies. They are part of the culture. And they recognize that when you get into positions of authority, that can easily become positions of power. And that is undergirded by the fact that you have access to money, as we have seen in football and so on. And yet football has that dark underbelly of systemic racism, as you're seeing. In Formula One, you've heard when after George Floyd, Lewis Hamilton saying, hello, am I the only one of my color inside here, right? So what do we do, guys? What do we do? Are you with me? You know, and so we're seeing the challenges that we have in sport. The Raiders coach who had to resign 2 days ago, right? Because of comments that he made on Facebook in exchange with other leading officials in the sport and people that he knows. And people are saying, well, should we be surprised at this? Because one nation after another has provided us with examples of poor leadership, of corrupt government, of lack of integrity. And so the sporting organized, and we also finding out that occurs even in religion, which we thought was sacrosanct. So that the sport cannot extricate itself from that. Then there's the issue of the Tokyo reality. What happened here, right? The people of Tokyo were not involved, but then is that much like Asian culture? What is the history of Japan itself in terms of democratic institutions and mode of operations, et cetera, et cetera? Let's do that reality check. Let's rip open the box. So the people were saying, and you got the polls, we don't want to host these games in the midst of a pandemic that we can't seem to, the next slide we're dealing with, right? We can't seem to get a grip on a pandemic that's wreaking havoc within our society. Why should we be hosting a game? But the IOC, its top sponsors, persuade the government, hey, have it at all costs. But even at the opening ceremony, and the day after the opening ceremony, one of the leading members of the host country's board says, it doesn't mean that we can't stop the games at any point in time, you know. So it begs the question, why did we have it in the first place? Yeah. So what does that tell us about the way in which we do sport? That when it is advantageous financially, we put everything else aside. You know, why did we go to Beijing in terms of all of the human rights abuses that were being highlighted by international organizations? Yeah, a number of international organizations, including Transparency and Human Rights Watch and others, were able to say we ought not to be going there. And the same issues are being raised again for 2022, where the same Beijing is now hosting the winter version of the Olympics. So how does the decision making work, right? Has the slide shows up though? Yeah. So we out of the experience of Tokyo, we ought to see some ominous signs that point to a concern that we must have about how we go about addressing the issues of government. It's very good to write all of the documents that we've seen from England and so on about, you know, putting codes of conduct in place, et cetera, et cetera. But who's to guard the guards? Who's to guard the guards? The very structure of our organizations place a tremendous amount of power in the hands of those who lead these organizations. And we don't yet have a sufficiently broad culture of leadership that speaks to good governance, because all around them, they're seeing these examples of what ought not to be done, but being done in such a consistent manner that we might as well join the group, you know? And so I think that in a sense, we have to be realistic. We have to rip open the box, not carefully try to make sure we don't destroy its contents. Let's just rip open the box and let things come out as they are. Where the chips fall, so be it. But I think at the end of the day, if we are serious about good governance, leadership, and integrity, we have to look at the 3 C's: a commitment, the level of commitment to honesty, to full disclosure on all aspects of what we are doing. Care for the people, care for the stakeholders, care for those whom we hope to engage because they are also members of the wider society. Our last presenter talked about change management. It begins with people. It begins with people. And thirdly, caution, cautious optimism. That yes, we believe that we can do better, but we continue to be hammered by examples of the challenges that those who try to do better face. And we are all working in the field, so we have an understanding of where these challenges are. Unless we pay attention to those 3 C's, unfortunately, the culture of sport will still be a reflection of the culture of our respective societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to you, Keith, for those really powerful and very, very insightful and interesting words today. It's an absolute pleasure to listen to you. Once again, thank you so, so much to the 4 panelists. I am very, very conscious of the time, but I kindly ask all the participants just for your patience if we run 5 minutes over the time today, because I do have one question that I would like to ask all 4 panelists, and I ask for a very short answer from all 4 of you, please. And then we will be concluding with a very quick presentation from our final speaker that will only take 5 minutes. And actually, we have some questions that we want to ask you as the participants. So I just ask you for your patience for an additional 5 minutes. But for now, the question I have for the 4 panelists, I mean, what interventions we've had today, I'm sure I'm not the only one wishing that we'd be sitting here for another couple of hours. But the words that we heard repeatedly today, we're learning about change, we're hearing about leadership, we're hearing about culture. So very, very quickly, I ask, we can start with Lynsey and go in the order of presentation. What can we as the members of the Sport for All movement do to secure the buy-in from the decision makers and from the leaders to bring them on board for change to occur within our organizations? Lynsey, if I can start with you very, very briefly, please.
Wow, yeah, great question. I think maybe to act as advocates for good governance, you know, there's been a lot of sharing of some common themes here. So to be able to sort of promote, advocate for some of these themes that we've talked about and maybe demonstrate some of the benefits and positive impacts that also some of the panelists have shared, I think. So people will change if they see the reason why that change. but recognizing that of course that's difficult when sometimes you're asking people who are in power to sort of devolve power or effectively give it up sometimes. So I guess in the shortest terms, it's advocates for it, nudging and continuing to connect like this and share those experiences and those benefits.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lynsey. The same question to you, Darlene.
Well, Lynsey, I appreciate what you had to say. Let me see if I can build upon that a little bit. The part that I think is terribly important is for all of us in our present state can be leaders. And part of that has to do with how are our skills to influence, or the politics of things, how are our skills to influence people? We need to learn how to influence people in a variety of situations. We need to be able to first engage them in a conversation and then try to find ways to find common ground to discuss things to begin to open. This takes time and it also takes patience. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Darlene. And the same question to you, Stanley.
Thank you, Keri. I answer it in 4 words. How do we manage? For me, you envision, you engage, you excite, and you align. That's how I'm going to respond to it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stanley. And the same question to you, Keith.
I believe that advocacy through being a major international sport pressure group. I believe, unfortunately, that people like to talk about the soft way to go at things. I think sometimes you have to bite the bullet and take on the challenge head on. And I think that TAFISA in its work needs to be able to show the world that these are the consequences if you do not continue to adhere to the positive aspects of good governance, leadership, and integrity.
Thank you so much, Keith, and a huge thank you once again to the 4 panelists. So very, very briefly now, I would just like to introduce our very final speaker. We're joined by Mr. John Marsden, who's representing Liverpool John Moores University. I promise this is going to be very quick, and as I said, we do have some questions to ask you as the participants, so we really appreciate your patience just for the next 5 minutes or so. So John is going to be introducing the Good Governance in Grassroots Sport package, which Liverpool John Moores University, Transparency International and TAFISA, we've all been working on for the past several months. Very brief introduction to John. He's been involved in sport, physical activity, health and well-being for over 40 years, having held a variety of positions. His career started as a sports coach in his home city of Liverpool and progressed into sports facility management. In 2005, he undertook the role of head of Liverpool Active City and was responsible for the creation, the delivery, and the implementation of the first Active City strategy in the city. In 2012, he became the head of public health in Liverpool, and whilst his new role involved broader health themes, sport was always a key element of the job. Over the past 5 years, John has been heavily involved in the development of active city models around the world, and he is the International Active City Commissioner for TAFISA in the International Active City Development and Advocacy Manager for Liverpool John Moores University. So John, I'm going to share your presentation now.
Thanks very much, Keri.
No problem, it is loading, just bear with me a second. Okay, I think it's my turn for technical difficulties. My screen has frozen. Sorry, just bear with me a second. Maybe you can just start on the package, John, while I
Yeah,
wait for
of
this
course,
to
yeah.
load. Thank you.
So basically, as Keri has said, the partnership between TAFISA, Transparency International, and Liverpool John Moores University, today's workshop is really a part of that. And what we've been developing in addition to that is actually a workbook. The workbook itself, and what I'll touch on very briefly, are just who could benefit from the book itself, the key themes, the possibility of us staging some regional workshops, which would be some sort of bespoke workshops to take into account the different needs of different stakeholders, and then maybe just a potential time frame for the launch of the workbook itself. The workbook then would really, we believe, be beneficial to certainly representatives of all the participants today and the global Sport for All movement, including international sport federations, national governing bodies of sport, national Olympic committees, sport departments of municipalities and universities, and drilling right down to grassroots sports clubs as well. Now, we appreciate in the process that several organizations around the world have already developed their own good governance concepts. Therefore, the guidance handbook would actually highlight the most common core principles, which when implemented will ensure a robust good governance approach. We've heard many great examples from the speakers today. What we hope is that the handbook will actually capture many of those and maybe allow us to elaborate a little bit more as well. So just to go through very briefly some of the key themes. Firstly, we would touch on in the handbook why good governance is needed. So as we've heard, in order to increase public trust in sport or any other organisation, a leadership concept based on the principles of transparency is particularly important. For example, the involvement of stakeholders of an association or club in fundamental decisions is necessary. Now, more than ever, sponsors and donors want to know in detail how the money they donate is being used. So evidence is required from the moment that there's a possibility of sponsorship funding being provided to an organisation, right through to how it is utilised and the outcomes from how that expenditure is actually being used. So it's very much around evidence-based practice, showing a clear, transparent thread as to how any donations and contributions or financial contributions are utilised. Another key theme is around structure of a good governance concept. So good governance, as we've heard in sport organisations, requires statutes which are fit for purpose. The basis of good governance is the commitment to values. However, values alone don't guarantee integrity, especially in difficult, high-pressure situations. Therefore, the handbook will set out how to identify and overcome those challenges by ensuring that the good governance concept is structured correctly. We've heard examples at kind of the higher echelons of organizations, how problems have arisen around good governance. And certainly the handbook will look to help organizations to identify what they are, how they can arise, and how they can be tackled. Some of the main points in relation to steps towards achieving good governance, I think as Sylvia mentioned in her presentation, what we want to do is to have something which is easy to understand, a document which is not easy to understand, easy to follow, and easy to implement. So the steps in the handbook will include the code of ethics, risk analysis, code of conduct, rules and measures according to risk analysis, information and communication, education for all staff, controls and monitoring, guidance on potential penalties and sanctions, and the role which each part of the good governance structure should take. In relation to transparency and participation, transparency itself strengthens the trust of members, of officials, of employees, sponsors, business partners, and indeed the general public. In relation to participation, This is an essential part of good governance. It includes the involvement of internal and external stakeholders in fundamental planning and in the decision-making processes. It is hoped that the Good Governance Workbook will support the global Sport for All movement in their commitment to sustainable, responsible, and transparent action. In relation to identifying possible risks, there will be a section within the workbook which will actually cover those and will help organisations to identify those areas of risk, including, for example, relating to theft, to financial irregularities, to protection of human rights, etc. There will be some additional content, so the workbook will also cover a number of other key themes relating to good governance, including conflict of interest and how to manage that. And Sylvia again mentioned about potential legal issues, and I know Darlene mentioned that in relation to the United States, legal issues and questions. The workbook itself will also feature good practices from around the world. And of course, if any of you should be aware of any good examples, either these could be your own or from other organizations who you've worked with, then we would really welcome you submitting these via the feedback form. Sometimes examples of good practice can help in bringing things to life. So we give those examples, people can learn from them, can develop and tweak their own bespoke models. So that would be really helpful to us if the global Sport for All movement could assist in submitting some of their own good practices. As I mentioned, we are planning to hold a number of regional good governance workshops, and for these, there's the potential for dealing with more localized issues and challenges. And if I could just hand back to Keri to maybe mention those and the poll which has been ongoing during the workshop. Thanks, Keri.
Thank you so much, John. So now I have some questions to ask the participants. We're going to go through these very quickly, and it's just really beneficial for us to know how you feel about your readiness to lead by example and strive for this good governance that we're aiming for. And also, as John said, we are planning on hosting some bespoke workshops in the near future, so it's to find out your interest here also. So the first question we have, and a poll will appear on your screen now, very simple, yes or no. Number one, are you ready to lead by example and pave the way for higher standards of good governance in sport for all? So if we just take 10 seconds, and if you can just answer that question for us, please. Just another few seconds. Right now, the results are overwhelmingly yes, which is great to know that you are ready to lead by example and be the next leaders. Okay, I think we'll move on to the second question. 98% answered yes. So the second question we have for you is good governance an important issue within your organization? Again, let's just take 10 seconds. This is just great for us to know if this is a current important issue, so that we can ensure that we're helping you, we're supporting you, and we're plugging any gaps that may exist. So right now we have 96% are saying, yes, it is. Okay, next question. Does your organization currently have access to tools and information to implement good governance? Here we go. So right now it's interesting. Almost 50-50. At the moment, we have 53% saying yes. Okay, very, very interesting to note. 51% yes, 49 no. The next question we have, and this is the final question for this part, is do you think a good governance workbook will benefit your organization? I know we weren't able to go into so much detail today, but we, as John said, we are creating this practical tool to help you on the start of your good governance journey. Okay, 96% are saying yes. So the final two questions I have are relating to these bespoke workshops. The wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise we've learned from the speakers today can't be ignored. And I think that it would be very, very useful if we were able to bring together the members of the Global Sport for All movement again in future to discuss governance and the elements of integrity and leadership. But also what we would like to know is if there's interest from you to attend workshops on the following. So the first would be a regional session whereby we will bring together the members within your region to discuss the implementation of a good governance framework. Would this be of interest to you to attend a regional session to help you implement the information as found in the good governance workshop? So right now, 98% say yes. And the very final question of today, before we say thank you and goodbye, is if you would be interested in attending a further session, and it would be with other global sport for all stakeholders within your target groups. So we'd bring together governments, we'd bring together IFs, NOCs, National Sport for All Institute, NGOs, etc. Okay, and I can see that 98% are saying yes. Okay, that was it. So just to conclude, I would like to once again, I'm just going to stop sharing. Thank you so much to all of the excellent, excellent speakers that we had today. Thank you, John, for your presentation at the end. Thanks to the participants for your patience, for your contribution. It's been an absolutely fantastic fourth workshop in the series for TAFISA, and I hope that I'll see you at our next one, which is taking place next month on the theme of sport and the environment. All participants that have attended today will receive a very short questionnaire following the session. We appreciate if you take 1 minute to complete it. My email address will also be in the feedback questionnaire. So if you have any good governance examples, best practices, anything to share, please get in touch. And the recording will also be available and shared with everyone. So on behalf of TAFISA, I would just like to say thank you so much to everyone for your attendance today, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Keri, and everybody. Bye-bye.